Good evening, everyone. It's an honor and privilege for me to welcome you all on behalf of the Cairo Climate Talks team to the 59th round of the Cairo Climate Talks. My name is Nada Al-Shanawaini. I'm an environmental researcher and marine biologist. For the past few years, I've been working in the fields of conservation and environmental consultancy in Egypt. I hold a master's degree in marine biodiversity and conservation from the University of Bremen, Germany, and the University of Pierre and Marie Curie in France. With pleasure, I'll be the moderator of tonight's panel of discussion. The Cairo Climate Talks have been serving as a platform to exchange experiences, raise awareness, and foster cooperation between policymakers, business, the scientific community, and civil society. Cairo Climate Talks has addressed various topics in over than 50 sessions that all fed into the impacts of climate change and environmental challenges. Session topics have ranged from clean technology and food security to public health and energy. Today's topic, climate negotiations in Katowice, key outcomes of COP24 and preparations for COP25, aims to engage us all in a dialogue on climate change as one of the most pressing issues facing humanity, and I'm personally looking forward to the conversations that will unfold throughout the night. As you are well aware, climate change is no longer a far-off problem that we can postpone, and it's fair to say that we can now witness the consequences in our daily lives. The brought about challenges in environmental conditions makes it necessary to work together. From the 2nd to the 16th of December 2018, representatives of governments, climate change experts, activists, private sector actors all came together at the 24th session of the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP24, at the Polish city of Katowice, aiming to advance the battle against climate change. There were over 30,000 diverse participants who engaged in different activities, side events, exhibits, and plenaries. Negotiations were developed in different thematic areas, such as finance, transparency, adaptation, and global reviews. During the COP24 summit, the parties adopted the Katowice rulebook, a full package implementing the Paris Agreement. The agreement is the first international agreement in history setting the world's climate policy for the years to come, which compels all countries in the world to take action on climate protection. The key deadline that we have now is 2020, when countries must show they have met targets set a decade ago for cutting their emissions, and when they must affirm new, much tougher targets. The high-level meeting at the COP24 on the pre-2020 stocktake offered ministers and parties a valuable opportunity to assess the spectrum of climate action across the globe in the period before 2020. A few speakers stressed the need to keep up the pressure and prevent efforts to reduce emissions from simply slipping beyond 2020. Alleviating climate change impacts and advancing climate actions require cooperation and joint coordinated action by diverse stakeholders, from governments and private sector entities to local communities and civil society organizations. And in light of this conference, today we will discuss the complex issues around climate change, from challenges to opportunities, and the way forward to the 25th UN Climate Change Conference in Chile. Cairo Climate Talks gathers today reputable panelists addressing climate change issues from different perspectives on an international and national level. We also highly anticipate the input and reflections of our esteemed guests. Our agenda starts today with welcome remarks, followed by a panel discussion, then a Q&A session, and finally a dinner will be served at the garden outside, so please join us later on for the dinner. Now, the floor will be open for the welcome address by Ms. Isabel Mering, Director of the DAD Regional Office Cairo, and our host tonight to commence the evening, followed by Mr. Zonke Zeman, Deputy Head of Mission at the Federal Republic of Germany in Cairo, and followed by Ms. Justyna Porodzińska, Deputy Head of Mission at the Republic of Poland in Cairo. And now, please welcome Ms. Mering to the floor.
Your Excellency, Mrs. Justyna Porodzińska, Deputy Head of Mission of the Embassy of the Republic of Poland, Your Excellency, dear Mr. Sönke Simon, Deputy Head of Mission at the German Embassy in Cairo, dear Mr. Philippe Maupay, Head of Science Department, German Embassy in Cairo as well, Your Excellencies, Members of Parliament, esteemed experts and panelists, dear CCT and DAD team, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening and welcome to the premises of the DAD Regional Cairo office and to the 59th round of Cairo Climate Talks. Let me start by saying that we are very glad to have our cooperation with the German Embassy in Cairo become a staple in our agenda. Hosting and participating in Cairo Climate Talks is not only important because of the crucial panel topics, but also because as an organization that represents the German higher education institutions, our role in research enables us also to support and act as a main pillar of climate negotiations, as is the title of the event today. Moreover, with the DAD being an experienced intermediary between university systems and a worldwide network of external partners, it certainly fits to partner and host such a momentous project that combines multiple stakeholders representing the German government, academic institutions, the Egyptian government, businesses, and of course, society. Confronting the pressing environmental hazards posed on our planet requires transforming our education, industries, and most of all, our mentalities regarding our energy consumption. On this basis, the DAD has implemented, for instance, the Bilateral Sustainable Development Goals Graduate Schools program funded by the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, the BMZ. This program is especially intended to assist universities in developing countries fulfill their role as an important driving force for SDGs globally and locally on basis of the SDGs of the United Nations. This is only to mention one of our numerous programs that impact our common goals. I believe that by taking part in this event today, it is evident that we all share fundamental understanding of the implications of global warming and the impact of climate change on our resources and well-being. I am also sure that the esteemed experts present with us here today will articulate through their expertise what the international community is now working on to address climate change even much better than I will. For that, I will not personally introduce the outline of the discussion, but rather end my word today, hoping that by bringing significant academic and governmental representatives to network, to share ideas, and brainstorm about COP24 challenges, we all will be able at the end to pave the way to successful contribution of Egypt and Germany in COP25. I would like to welcome you all once again this evening to be here, and I would like to give the floor to our representative of the German Embassy, Mr. Sönke Simon. Thank you so much.
Ms. Mehring, dear friends from the Ministry of Environment, parliamentarians, excellencies, distinguished panelists, dear Cairo Climate Talkers. Friday for Future. You probably know the slogan by now. It is a message of young people for politicians and us, the older generation. And the message is quite clear. Do something and do it fast. Take action to fight climate change. Just last Friday, young people gathered in almost 1,700 cities from Helsinki to Sydney to show that they were not satisfied with the climate protection measures taken by their own governments. And their movement is gaining momentum. Distinguished guests, climate change is back on the top of the political agenda. And this is, of course, the perfect moment for our Cairo Climate Talks here. Thank you for participating. I'm particularly pleased to welcome the Polish Deputy Chief of Mission. Thank you, Justina, for joining us and sharing Poland's perspective and experience on hosting the COP24 negotiations in Katowice last year. Poland, and its COP president Kotika managed to negotiate in a very complicated geopolitical context and significantly contributed to a success of multilateralism. COP24 has helped us to move forward, and I would like to point out here the key role played by Egypt and Germany working closely together for the success of this conference. And this was exemplified by Minister Dr. Yasmin Fuad and State Secretary Jochen Flassbart taking over the lead regarding the consultations on climate financing, a very central aspect. So last year's COP24 was a success, but we need more. The protest I just mentioned at the beginning also started last year. 16-year-old Greta Thunberg from Sweden is urging students all over the world to follow her example, sitting in front of government buildings until each nation is on a safe pathway towards a below 2 degrees warming target as mandated by the Paris agreements. Her movement is gaining support. In Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, a group of 12,000 scientists signed a letter to support her goals under the headline Scientists for Future. Last week, the European Parliament passed a resolution in support of the students' climate demonstration and vowed to make Europe climate neutral by 2050. German Environment Minister Svenja Schulze lauded the students' movement and thanked them for the wake-up call. Minister Schulze pointed out that Germany was actively working for climate protection, as exemplified by the Cabinet's decision to end the use of coal by 2038. Distinguished guests, the students are right to remind us of the emergency of climate protection. Upcoming generations will bear the brunt of the consequences of climate change, while our generation was able to enjoy the economic benefits of fossil fuels without worrying too much about its negative consequences. And this is why it is so important for us to gather tonight here, not only to discuss what has been achieved in Katowice, but also plan the way forward to the next COP in Chile and beyond, keeping the importance of climate protection on the agenda every day and not only during the big UN conferences. Let me conclude by thanking all of you for joining us here tonight, and of course Ms. Mehring and the DRD for hosting us time and again here for our Cairo Climate Talks. And I hope our discussion tonight will show us how Egypt, Germany and Poland can work together so that our grandchildren can be proud of what we did to save the environment. Thank you very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like first to thank the hosts, my colleague Sönke Simon from the Embassy of Germany, Monsieur Mopé, and Ms. Mehring from that office in Cairo for inviting me here and for giving me this opportunity to say a few words to you about COP24, which was held in Poland. I think this is a very, very important initiative to organize this session of Cairo Climate Talks about the COP24, as we have to continue this job, not only to stop there, but to go forward. So I am very happy that we can discuss here the achievements of this last conference of the parties to the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change. All the parties work hard. Egypt was one of the main actors who led the G77 group in China, chairing also in parallel the African group. We are also very grateful to Germany for its contribution to the final success of the summit. The main objective of the Polish presidency at COP24 was to adopt a decision ensuring full implementation of the Paris Agreement, to accept the so-called implementation package, the Katowice rules. The implementation package will give the Paris Agreement a realistic shape, but setting out a path that each country will decide to follow in terms of intensifying its climate protection efforts. To put it simply, there is no Paris Agreement without Katowice. The ambition of the Polish presidency was to adopt rules and tools that will create a systematic solution for the whole world, replacing the point-based discussion on fragmented objectives, which doesn't allow for a comprehensive approach to all important areas of emissions, removals, balancing emissions, implementation measures, and measures to adapt economies to expected changes in the future. And we, all the parties, succeeded. The world community has largely completed the framework. It needs to act and track its own actions. Because of the Katowice rulebook, no party can say that it doesn't know what is expected of them as an excuse not to implement the Paris Agreement. At the heart of the rulebook is a common framework for all countries with flexibility for those who need it. The rules provide clarity and will make it hard for parties to avoid their responsibilities. The facilitative compliance system doesn't provide for penalties, but will ensure that we know what the parties have done and what they neglected. In all, the world finally has an instrument it agreed to use in countering a global problem with a concerted global action. The Katowice rulebook secures the organization, among others, in the 6 following ways. First, we can now clearly see what a party declares and will do, and we are able to compare each other's level of effort. The Katowice rulebook describes step by step what is needed to explain to the rest of the world and to explain what the party intends to do and how. Second, the Katowice rulebook provides a guidance on how the parties must account for their emissions in an effort to curb any attempts to account creatively by any party to the agreement. Third, everyone has to move only forward in their emission reduction efforts over time. The systems, the expectations are common, but there is a recognition of the different starting points and different national capacities, which is very important, especially when we work with all the partners from all over the world with different levels and some capacities. In finance, this is the fourth, in finance the countries receive detailed instructions what should be reported. It is a transparency, such as the level of resources provided and their use. Fifth, in the section dealing with transparency of action, we managed also to agree the common approach by all countries. Only those who claim they have no capacity to follow the guidelines can use flexibility. However, they must explain what constraints are and provide a plan. Six, we also agreed the modalities for the global review of ambition, the so-called global stocktake. It will take place every 5 years, beginning in 2023. Last but not least, there are 2 declarations and the partnership, which were also presented by the Polish presidency, and they were joined by the parties. It was Just Transition Declaration, which is very important because it gives the political support to the issue of the need of social security programs for those who are touched by the transition towards a low-carbon economy. The public policies need to reduce emissions, but they will face social resistance and significant political risks. So this so-called Just Transition Declaration is a very important step towards this discussion, and it was joined by 55 parties. And the second declaration is called Forests for Climate. And this one was the Poland's intention to show the other countries how to achieve a balance between emissions and removals, using innovative solutions in the field of forest management and the natural process of carbon dioxide absorption by soils and forests. By the way, from 1995 to 2014, the area of forests in our country increased by 5,000 square kilometers. About 500 million trees are planted every year. So we are very proud of this achievement, and I'm also proud to speak about it. And the third thing, it was a Driving Change Together Katowice Partnership for E-Mobility, which was sponsored together by Poland and the Great Britain. It was the partnership relating to the challenges of reducing emissions and pollutions that cover all sectors of the economy. And the transport sector is responsible for 14% of global greenhouse gas emissions. With this in mind, the Polish presidency proposed to make electromobility one of the leading topics of the conference of the parties. It is the Driving Change Together, this partnership. It is an impetus to ensure that all people can live in clean, citizen and environmentally friendly cities by making efforts to promote electromobility and clean transport. To conclude, no Paris without Katowice, but we need the next steps. The success of Katowice means to make progress in mechanisms without which the Paris Agreement will not be able to function in real terms. But the further action will be to negotiate the issues which remain unsolved. It will happen at COP25 in Chile. We hope that the fact that Chile will take over the presidency of the Conference of Parties from Poland will strengthen our cooperation, not only on the basis of climate policy, but also in the other areas. I am convinced that the COP25, which will be held in San Diego soon, will be also a negotiating and organizational success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mering, Mr. Zeman, and Ms. Porodzynska for your welcome remarks. Without further additions, please help me in welcoming our panelists for the night. Mr. Arne Riedel, lawyer at Ecological Institute in Berlin and member of the German delegation to the UN climate negotiations. Mr. Arne is a think tank for environmental policy. He's working on laws and governments in the areas of climate change, renewable energies, and environmental protection in the Arctic. Mr. Arne supports the German Ministry for the Environment as a legal expert in the international climate negotiations and is part of the German and EU delegations. Please welcome Mr. Arne to the podium. Our second guest is Dr. Ahmed Badr, Executive Director of RICRI. Dr. Ahmed has more than 20 years of international experience in several senior operational positions in the field of renewable energy, water and infrastructure in most of the multinational financial institutions, namely the World Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, European Commission, and Japan Bank for International Cooperation. Please welcome Dr. Ahmed to the podium. Our third guest is Dr. Shireen Al-Baradei, Assistant Professor at the Civil and Infrastructure Engineering Program at Nile University. Dr. Shireen is an expert in hydraulics, water quality and water quality modeling, environmental engineering, and sanitary engineering. She published a book and many research papers in her field of specialization in international refereed journals. She has also worked as a designer of irrigation and wastewater networks. Please welcome Dr. Shireen to the podium. Our fourth guest is Mr. Saber Osman, Climate Change Adaptation Manager at the Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency. Mr. Saber is also a member of National Committee for Climate Change and National Committee for Sustainable Development. Please welcome Mr. Saber to the podium. As we start our discussion, I would just like to remind our audience that we'd be happy to address all your questions during the Q&A session that will follow. You'll find some yellow sticky notes above the event flyer that's been distributed earlier. So please prepare your questions and mention who's your question addressed to from our guests, and somebody will pass by and collect them later on. Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank you very much all again. And so maybe to start with the basics, maybe Mr. Arni, you can give us some insight about the key outcomes of the Katowice Climate Change Conference COP24, and how does it differ from the Fiji Climate Change Conference COP23?
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and the warm words and the warm welcome here. And I also want to join everyone else and to thank the organizers and the German Embassy and the DRD for hosting us. I'm excited to sit here on the panel. And thank you for the question. The difference between the 23rd COP in Bonn, the Fiji Bonn COP, and the COP24 in Katowice is mainly that the COP20 we took between 2015 and 2018 took us 3 years to develop the Katowice rulebook. So when the Paris Agreement entered into force in November 2016, the parties agreed we would need to set up a timeline to make it as implementable as quickly as possible. So the deadline was set for 2018. So in 2017, while there were many achievements and some progress in sort of conceptual thinking and exchange, we were in the timeline towards Katowice. So Katowice was always the end point, and so Fiji Bonn was an important milestone on that way. There was an exchange on the achievements so far on the pre-2020 action. The Talanoa dialogue was taking place. There were important decisions on the gender action plan. There was an important decision on the local communities and indigenous peoples platform, but everything was leading up towards Katowice. So now we do have a rulebook in place that was mentioned before. Important implementation angles, how states actually need to implement their obligations, how climate action plans look like, the NDCs, how adaptation communications look like, how the transparency system will be put in place. So I'm happy to elaborate, but maybe leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arne. So now that we understand that there are nationally determined contributions that need to be submitted by countries to achieve the Paris Agreement. So Egypt, as a signatory to the Paris Agreement, needs to put forward its best efforts to reduce the national emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. So maybe Mr. Sabir could highlight to us the main objectives and targets of Egypt's nationally determined contributions, and what are some challenges that we face in developing national targets to combat climate change?
In the beginning, I'd like to thank the AD and the German Embassy for hosting us, as well as the beautiful city of Katowice for hosting the COP24. And concerning our NDC, we published the first NDC, or in the beginning it was INDC, intended nationally determined contribution. And after that, it's become our NDC after the ratification of the Paris Agreement in 2015. And according to our NDC, we have a very ambitious plan to face the challenge of climate change and to adapt with its impacts on different sectors, especially the coastal zone areas, water resources, agriculture, as well as health, because climate change has impacts on the health conditions, the urbanization, and the other sectors. In addition to that, we have different efforts to mitigate our climate change emissions, the greenhouse gases, from different sectors. Mainly, we have the energy sector considered as the main sector of greenhouse gases in Egypt. Around 70% of our emissions coming from the energy sector, distributed to transportation industry, energy industry, as well as electricity production. The second sector is industry. The third sector is agriculture, and the fourth sector is waste management. And we have some policies in place, as may you know. For example, the subsidies reform of the energy sector, as well as energy efficiency. Nowadays, all of us as Egyptian, when we walk in the streets, we see the LED lighting systems that started to be widespread. We have big projects for renewables in Zafarana, for example, wind farms. We have solar panels in the biggest project in the Middle East, Pemban, for example, also. So we have already taking actions related to the climate change mitigation, and we have more ambition to increase our greenhouse gas reductions. We expect that by 2035 we will be able to reduce around 22% of our greenhouse gases in comparison to 1990 emissions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sober. So speaking of projects and development, Egypt is between development ambitions and national efforts to combat the impacts of climate change. So, Dr. Ahmed, in your opinion, what do you think are necessary adjustments that should be adopted by mega projects in the country, including energy, to reduce national emissions and mitigate climate change?
Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for giving me the chance to join. Well, let me tell you two things. Let's first compare between the model in Europe and the model in the Middle East. The European, specifically the Germans, when they started their models, that was basically based on the solar rooftop applications. This is how they reached that. This is totally the opposite in the business model in the Middle East, specifically a country like Egypt, where basically mega-scale projects, that's basically what's happening. And I have to say that for the feed-in tariff scheme, despite it's extremely attractive, the Egyptian, for example, or even Moroccan, who are really advanced as well as Jordan, this is the three front runner for the renewable in the Middle East. They basically rely more on larger scale on-grid solutions, which basically very, very costly. With regard to the impact of climate change, I have to say that the main impact coming from climate change, I will come to a renewable energy project. This is my arena, but I have to say that yesterday there is one of the biggest meetings for one of the MDBs at world scale. He's number 4 in the world, which is Islamic Development Bank. They are convening now, and I was invited to join them with FAO yesterday for their internal meeting for their climate change policy. And it's about adaptation. Adaptation is a challenge that's facing Egypt, if we're talking about basically what's going to happen. But for renewable energy, what I see clearly that Egypt is doing great, because it's the second largest economy. So when Egypt opened its scale, it would basically, and it's now, basically we do that in our centers at the Middle East level. Egypt just opening its scale by the BEO scheme for the wind. Now it's coming to the fact that we will be the first one in terms of country among the 22 countries. Yet Saudi Arabia will come in the second when they will start their also what we call it larger mega scale, not only even mega scale. But for renewable energy specifically, I have to say very important aspect. If you're talking about Egypt and the challenge, I think that this large scale project would give a very positive economic and environmental and social governance when it really be led by only and only private sector. And that's basically the case. Look what's happening basically in Pemban or even in the Gulf of Suez, not even Zafarana is publicly owned. It's basically sovereign loans that the government is taking its shoulders, mainly from European Commission and from the Germans and from AFD and European Investment Bank. But if we're coming to the fact that it's really coming through private sector, the positive impact, if you go for Pemban, among 22 private sector investors for creating jobs, and around that you create what we call it the momentum for climate change impact, that's really what Egypt needs to do. And I think that Egypt is moving, not I think, I'm sure from what I'm saying because I'm in the kitchen for this. Egypt now already signed more than 1,200 megawatt of large wind utility scale projects. The second phase will come basically to be more efficient in cost, meaning that if you're talking about the tariff for large utility scale for wind, it had been scaled down by competition among the developers from 3.82 cents to reaching something like 3.07. That's really meaning that there is a bankability dimension, there is private sector led, there is trust in the economy, and I think that would be really what needs to happen for Egypt to expand on that. And basically the action plan based on the strategy developed by the support of the EU is going towards these directions. And this is how it should be, and it would go, and this will ensure private sector will lead, because the investment needed is really tremendous. So coming with private sector plus other dimension of phasing out subsidy is really what's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. And let me move to Dr. Shireen. And now that we have higher temperatures, they're projected to affect all aspects of the hydrological cycle, which has severe implications on food security and return. So could you tell us, Dr. Shireen, what are the water resources in Egypt that are most impacted by climate change? And which ones, in your opinion, need immediate intervention to be used efficiently?
Well, let me first start by welcoming the people and also thanking the German Embassy, DAD, and all other participants that made this event happen. I would just like to explain first what the hydrological cycle is. Maybe many of you know it, but I'm going to explain it though. Hydrological cycle means you are having actually evaporation that comes because the sun heats the ground. So you do have evaporation of water from the sea, from the river, any water body, and from the soil as well. And then they are going to go up, form the clouds. Then you are going to have rain, and the rain will increase the river and will increase the sea water levels, or forming them actually. Then you are going to have the cycle again. Now, when we have global warming, the evaporation is going to increase. When the evaporation is going to increase, it is going to leave the soil without water. It is going to cause a drought. There is a problem actually, and it is something contradictory that the global warming is going to induce, which is it's going to induce more rain, more water, and at the same time it is going to induce drought. Two things that are contradictory. How would this happen? As I said, when it is going to warm, then you are going to have more evaporation. So when the water is going to go up to the clouds or to the up in the atmosphere, actually, when it is going to be warmer, the atmosphere, it is going to hold more vapor pressure and more water. When it is going to hold more water, you are going to have more rain. So it is going to induce more rain. This is going to cause flooding in some places. So when it is going to cause flooding in some places, you do have runoff. The runoff, it is going not to affect the soil. So it is going to run to the sea, it's going to run to the rivers, so without actually affecting the soil. So you are going to have drought, and at the same time you are going to have flood, which is something devastating for the crops because you are going to have drought, and of course for the human beings because you are going to have floods, and the sea levels and the river levels are going to rise. Although there is a controversial talk about that, because some people and some studies were made and they say no, the evaporation is going to be higher, so the levels are not going to be risen as much as we expect. So much actually studies has to be conducted. Now back to your question, the global warming is going to affect the surface water very much. It is going to affect the groundwater. Why? Because when you do have evaporation, you are going to increase the salinity of the ground. This will devastate the crop, first thing, and it is going to increase the salinity of the groundwater. So from my point of view, the two main water resources that are going to be affected are the seawater, the Nile water, which is the surface water or open channels, and the groundwater.
And what do you think we need as an intermediate intervention to alleviate from this threat?
Actually, to work on securing new water resources. Like, for example, we could hinder or we could lessen the evaporation. As I mentioned before, with, for example, and I did a research on that, which is covering the water channels, for example. This is one thing. You could actually go and divert to a desalination, which is, I know at the beginning it is going to be expensive, but on the long run, it's going to provide us with a yielding of much better results, and Egypt started to do that with the desalination, actually. This is another thing that we could do. We could actually move to the hydroponics way of agriculture, meaning you are going only to plant plants in water without soil. This is a new thing, actually, that happened. And why is it important? It is important because you don't have soils, you don't need pesticides, you don't need insecticides. So you are not going to pollute the water, so the water is going to be free, so you are going to preserve your resources. So I also think that hydroponics is very important to implement.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shireen. And now there is the pledge to mobilize $100 billion per year in climate finance for action in developing countries by 2020 is critical. And it's vital for building confidence and enabling developing countries to fully participate in global efforts to address climate change. But there seems to be a lack of agreement on what counts as a climate finance. So, Mr. Arne, from your perspective, what do you think counts as a climate finance? And I'd also like to hear from Dr. Ahmed afterwards about the extent to which you think climate finance affects developing countries in implementing their targets set in their NDCs. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Just to send this, I'm not an economist, I'm a lawyer, so bear with me. I think the 100 billion pledge by 2020 is an important achievement. That was, one of the main outcomes already at COP15 in Copenhagen and has been pushed forward to 2025. This includes public and private sources, so it's supposed to not just incentivize that states pledge their contributions, but also that all private sectors should participate in that. So it's a very wide definition. The question is, how can private sector investments be assigned to certain states' contributions, maybe to see which region of the world is contributing accordingly to their responsibilities or their share of CO2 emissions. So it's a very difficult question. I cannot provide a proper answer because there's no agreement worldwide. And also, it's not just the liquidity that's going to be required, but also guarantees, sometimes loans that are very helpful for projects to actually get started running. And I think on the ground angle, you will have a much better perspective on this. So maybe just to add, the 100 billion goal is something that we have until 2025 in place currently. What we agreed on in Katowice is that we're going to start the discussions how to continue after 2025 with a floor or a minimum of these 100 billion. So there will be eventually more. But having said that, it's important also to raise ambitions from all parties worldwide to actually contribute to the existing 100 billion goal, because currently I think we're at 10.8 billion out of these 100 pledged currently. I think Germany is in a decent direction on its way, but there are some parties still very hesitant, and with the US on the horizon probably pulling out of the Paris Agreement starting 2020, this could be also an important contributor being lost just when it's actually supposed to start. So there are some clouds on the horizon. So maybe I'll just hand away.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Arne. That's a very stimulating question. Let me integrate with Mr. Arne on this. Yes, it was $100 billion every year to reach actually the total by year 2030, 300 trillion. That's really what was agreed in Paris Agreement. What have been committed until now is 10.8 billion, which is by far less than 2% what is needed. And it should be every year 100 billion. That's basically what have agreed. This is basically the money in the Green Climate Fund. And we all know the scandal that happened for the Green Climate Fund when it was published in the air, when the former executive director of Green Climate Fund have resigned during the board. The board almost took 1 year ago, and there is a new executive chairman in place. The key issue here is that basically because of the, between two hyphens, it's about fiduciary aspect. Let me, if you allow me to explain to the audience what fiduciary means. Fiduciary means is basically the accountability at stake, that who manages the money. So if you're talking basically, we talk about the language of international development banks. Each bank, even commercial bank, they always have what they call it rating, financial rating by accreditation or by accrediting agency like Standard & Poor, like Moody's. Basically, for all development banks, they all what to call it AAA rated. AAA rated meaning that they don't have non-performing loans, they don't waste money of the developers. And exactly, if you are an investor and you wanted to invest your money, you go to a commercial bank, you put your money. Also, basically, Western European countries and United States, they have also to invest their money in a place that's basically ensuring that their investment on basically on their pension fund, on their taxpayers are well invested. And the issue is that when Green Fund or the Green Climate Fund initiated in South Korea, until now there is a big problem regarding the basically what we call it, how we will ensure the money in terms of concessional loans will be paid back, and that basically there will be a non-performing loan. This is a key challenge. Until now, Green Climate Fund did not perform that, and that's why in each board meeting, last of which was almost 2 weeks ago, there was a big problem. How the European countries or representative of their respective Minister of Finance, they are saying, well, how can I ensure my money get back because it's European taxpayers' money, or this is American taxpayers' money, or this is even G20 taxpayers' money, including, for example, Saudi Arabia or the famous G20. This is a challenge. This is a big issue. This is what really stopping, I would say, the action of an end for the needed in terms of giant important support. Let's talk about some kind of very surprising numbers. What is needed for investment climate change to mitigate the target of 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius is again $30 trillion. And what's happening until now that these 30, the MDF and the European and North American and all AAA rated countries of the G20, they were going to contribute through their money less than 3 trillion until 2030. The 27 will be coming mainly from private sector. Who are the private sector? Let's basically take more zooming in on this. I'm sorry for being long, but you asked to explain on this. It's basically coming from about what we call it venture capital or private equity. To make it very simple for non-bankers, venture capital or private equity, if we're talking example, since we're talking about Egyptian context, one of basically like Sawiris, who was in Egypt, he has a venture capital. So if he wanted to invest, he has to go for investment fund or a big bank, basically like IFC of Early Bank or like the EG of Germany or like Brobaco of France. And he will say, I put part of my money in. What is your investment for me? What is the return on investment? How money I will be gated back? And for this venture capital and equity fund, if you will not ensure there will be a return on investment, why should he invest? He doesn't care. Which is simply, this is a bankability issue. And until now, there is no clear definition, as Mr. Arni said, about what is bankability means. Except only for one thing. Some of the European countries and very little of the development financial institutions, specifically European, they started to launch what they call it green bond. Green bond meaning that a country like Egypt, when it comes a stable economy starting from B+, which basically in the middle of its creditability, basically they have to say, we are having a very clear strategy for combating renewable energy. And these are our targets. These are the basically indicators. Indicators that you want for energy sector, there is phase out of subsidy, there is economic stability, there is political goodwill. It's a mix between several indicators and basically very strong infrastructure. Who would like to come and invest as private sector? If this will really satisfy the private sector, imagine that you have 100,000 Egyptian pound in your bank account. And you really wanted to invest in this money to make sure that you will take it back. You will be 100% sure that you will not waste it. Basically, by going to the bank and telling to the bank, give me all indicators that my money will be paid back with the interest. Otherwise, I will not buy my money in. This is typically what the invest means at larger scale. And with all due, at world scale until now, green bond and investment in renewable energy or basically in all mitigations are limited to only to the one part of mitigation and less than what expected or planned to be by more than 5%, by less than 5%. For adaptation, I have to say the situation is much worse. So what needs to happen, I think we will come in the second round to tell you what's happening, but this is basically the situation. to have basically the theory and the ground, so to integrate with Mr. Arni, so situation is really not up to expectation. Private sector is the only hope for investment to take place to combat renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. I believe Mr. Arne has additional comments.
So, and just one or two additional sentences. And thank you so much for that explanation. I could have never delivered that anywhere nearly so eloquently. And just to add, maybe as a silver lining on the horizon, while we're talking about climate finance in the terms of the Paris Agreement, Green Climate Fund, there are many other investments which can be sort of brought towards a similar goal of the Paris Agreement, greening finance in the long term, without actually being counted towards these 100 billion. So if a big Norwegian pension fund would decide to take several billions out of nuclear energies or fossil fuel subsidies or also fossil fuel funds, then there will be also changes in investments over time. And because it has been mentioned before, Germany just had a commission which came out with a report in January 2019 recommending to phase out coal generating power by 2038. This is for the companies having a coal power plant in Germany. This is basically something they won't invest anymore. Yes. Right? So legislation can set on the national level an incentive also for private capital to find other ways and more renewable energies, for instance, which can contribute to the goal of the Paris Agreement without being part of the 100 billion.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Arne. So getting back to our national efforts to combat climate change, it's very clear that there are different starting points, different capacities and national circumstances. So Mr. Sabir, could you tell us more about the main pillars of mitigation and adaptation to climate change impact in Egypt? And what do you think we can realistically achieve out of these targets?
Actually, our plan for the upcoming period actually is built on different pillars. The first pillar is to strengthen our institutional capacity. And last week, His Excellency the Prime Minister, he scaled up the National Committee for National Council for Climate Change to become under his supervision. So he will be heading the National Council of Climate Change, as well as the structure of the National Council itself will change. So we will have a Supreme Committee. This committee consists of 8 ministers, in addition to His Excellency the Prime Minister, which could be considered as a small cabinet for climate change. As well as we have other 2 layers. We have executive office, which will be responsible for articulating and shaping the policies, and then the base we will have technical committees for climate change adaptation, mitigation, as well as means of implementation. And through this technical committees, maybe I can answer your question. So concerning climate change adaptation, we are working on different perspectives. We are trying through our national adaptation plan, which we expect to start by the end of this year, to conduct a risk assessment study for climate change impacts on our different sector, in order to have a holistic approach to deal with climate change issue, as well as prioritize our interventions and adaptation measures. Also concerning the mitigation, we are working to develop our low emission strategy and have different policies related to subsidies, reforming the energy sector, feed-in tariffs, and others, such as in the agriculture sector. We are working in order to reduce our emissions from fertilizers, as well as other emissions from livestock and different type of crops. In the industry, we have a very ambitious plan in order to have different interventions, especially in the cement industry as well as fertilizers. and we are cooperating with Germany, for example, in one of our biggest projects in order to reduce the N2O emissions from the fertilizers in different companies in the industrial sector, as well as we are cooperating also with Germany in the solid waste management in order to improve the whole cycle of the waste sector, so we can have more recyclation. We reduce the emissions from our open dumpings to have landfills instead, and manage the whole cycle of the waste in order to reduce the emissions from the waste sector. So we have very ambitious plan, and we are working in different perspectives, and I believe that this will be reflected in our reporting through the NDC or the biennial update reports, or the BTR, the biennial transparency report, which is one of the outputs of Katowice rulebook. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sober. Dr. Shireen, in your opinion, do you think our nationally determined contributions are adequate enough, or do we need to raise our ambitions? And also, you mentioned earlier we need to have a direction of using new water resources and create new sources. So do you think we should give it more weight or give more weight to adapting our existing resources?
Actually, both. We have to work on increasing our resources that are already there, and we have to adapt new resources, as I mentioned before, because especially that it is expected, like after 50 to 70 years, the northern part of the delta is going to be completely flooded. This is actually, an impact of the global warming. So we have to take mitigation about that. I know that this is not related to the water resources preservation, but I have to say this because it's actually a warning. It was said that some actually researchers said that the Nile is going to have 25 more water. It will be increasing by 25 more %, but other studies said it is going actually to have less water by 70%, the sea and the Nile River, okay, because of the evaporation. So in the second case, we have to look for new resources. As I said before, we have actually, if we do have groundwater, why not to recharge the groundwater? We have to recharge it, build dams, things like that in order to recharge the groundwater. Look for, as I said before, the desalination. The flash floods, for example, don't have that much rain, but sometimes some sort of flash flood comes that is devastating. So we could actually put dams, or we could see some measures in order to preserve the water that is going to come from the flash floods, for example. So yes, from my point of view, we have to preserve the existing water resources, and we have to add new water resources, and we have to work on that. But many projects are done now in Egypt, as my colleagues here kindly stated. Like, for example, the Benban, for example, this is solar energy. Solar energy actually is going to lessen the emissions of the CO2. So you are going to preserve the land and the water from the global warming effect. You have other actually energy reduction, other energy usage, like, for example, the wind farms that are in Zafarana. This will reduce the CO2, and also you are going to increase, as the honorable lady here said, the forests. This is actually a main issue. We have to increase the plantations and the forests, and not do deforestation actually, in order to have the plants to aid us in the CO2 process removal. So it's not only water resources, no, it's a cycle, it's a big, huge cycle. So we have to adapt each and every part of it, and we have to get solution for it. The energy and the water, they go hand in hand with each other.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sheen. I believe Mr. Sober has a comment.
Yes, I believe that this brings us to the second pillar of our plan to deal with climate change in Egypt is knowledge. we are trying to improve our understanding because, as Doctor mentioned, we have a big range. When we use modeling, for example, we have a big range between increase or decrease of the water resources from the River Nile, and that's why we decided to have from our domestic budget a new project for downscaling the global circulation models. And we started to work in cooperation with the Egyptian Meteorological Authority as well as the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation in order to use different techniques, the statistical and dynamical downscaling, so we can have better projections about different scenarios in the future. So, and we are using two scenarios of the IPC, the 4.5 as well as the 8.5 in order to reduce the range as well as improve and enhance our understanding what will happen for the water resources, agriculture, urbanization, sea level rise in the future, and as well as to visualize this through application. So we will have interactive map using GIS techniques in order to provide all this information in a more understandable and easy way for the policymakers, so they can understand what is the kind of impacts on and in which sector, and start to plan and take decisions according to this enhanced information and knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sober. And getting back to energy, there's a global increase in energy demand, and it's inevitable, and it comes with an increase in greenhouse gas emissions, which poses challenges for energy production and transmission. So, Mr. Arne, could you tell us about some recent developments in Germany's climate and energy policies, and how do you think we can foster cooperation between Germany and Egypt with respect to capacity building and technology transfer?
Right. I think regarding the energy policy, the renewable energy feed-in tariff that has been sort of the core starting point for the German energy transition, that has changed massively over the recent years. So there were big reforms in 2012, 2014, 2017. So moving more and more towards auctioning of new licenses, basically. So this is from a feed-in tariff, we're moving away a little bit. And this becomes more important, the expansion of grids, for instance. That is a key aspect of German energy policy currently. But what has been mentioned, and I think that's the most recent developments, would be the Coal Commission, as it was referred to. It was Commission for Growth, Sustainable Transition, and Employment. So, because it was looking not only at greenhouse gas emissions, but also, we've heard before, just transition, the attempt to make sure that the regions who are dependent on coal industries, that they don't get left out standing in the rain, but they are actually taken on the hand, and there will be measures introduced to make this a more manageable transition for them. So the recommendations that the Commission has is now a stepwise phasing out of hard coal as well as lignite coal by sort of stepwise 2020, 2030, and then 2038. And I think this will really change, again, the pace of renewable energy expansion, because all the energy that we are sort of phasing out with the nuclear phase out and now the coal phase out will need to be replaced, and renewable energies will need to fill that gap. And so they will be able to fill that gap. We need that grid extension. So just from deciding against fossil fuel and nuclear energy, the whole system changes. So this might actually be able to also have some sector coupling. That's one of the other buzzwords, I guess, in the German energy discussion. How can we also reduce emissions not just in the energy sector, but also in the transport sector, in industry, in buildings? And electrification, for instance, of transport, that could be one of the future things. But then we don't need only to ramp up our renewable energy generation just for the energy sector, but also for other sectors. So this coupling of sectors, this is something that has been going on very much. The most recent one, and I'll close on that, and maybe the ideas for some more cooperation we can add on later. The most recent development is really the German climate law. That is not there yet. There's a draft by the Federal Ministry of the Environment, which I haven't read because I'm an external consultant. but to the public knowledge, there is the aim by the Environmental Ministry to increase ambition in Germany of greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2050, to reduce them not just in our target corridor we have currently between 80% and 95%, but really narrow down to that 95% to be almost emission-free by 2050. That is one of the aspects. There would also be suggested a panel of experts that would advise the government. I've heard with very much interest the developments in Egypt with the Climate Change Council. So that would be maybe a somewhat similar idea, to have a regular update from experts to the government. But this draft law is not in force yet. So this is currently under discussion between the different ministries. So we'll have to see what comes out of it by, I think, later in autumn or winter this year. There will be probably a final law. But this is really going to change how the energy and climate policy will look like in the next 5, 10, or even 30 years. And maybe close on the areas for cooperation. I think there are, we've heard now from the solid waste sector, but there are many examples where Germany has gathered experience with feed-in tariffs, with different funding schemes for renewable energies, how to incentivize investments in energy efficiency technologies. So there's already quite a number of policy expertise that has been built up, but also, of course, the technological expertise. So I think that's where already some exchange is taking place. We have partnerships organized by the GIZ. So there's the NDC partnership that has been mentioned before on mitigation projects. So there's already some advice and knowledge exchange taking place. Of course, on the adaptation angle, there are experts in Germany which are more than happy, I think, to work together. And we've heard already, exactly, and continue that. Right. So exactly. So there are these aspects in place. So I have no doubts that will be these will be the basis, and additional experiences in Germany with a coal phase out might also be helpful for other countries to learn as we are going ahead worldwide, hopefully, to get rid of fossil fuel as an energy generating source. How to do this with a functioning economy at the same time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arne. And now, moving to Dr. Beth, how do you think we can build institutional and national capacities of the different units in the renewable energy sector to account for the pressing climate change challenges?
Well, Americans have developed a very good development model for building the institutional capacity at their national communities. Let's agree on one thing. To build institutional capacity, we need to know how the money will flow in order to build their capacity to manage. And if we agree that it's only about private sector, governments in the Middle East, after the 2011 social uprising or the several political changes, have basically moved towards private sector. If you're talking about the whole region, including Egypt, Egypt now is moving by 80% of its investment to private sector. Started with energy, but it's moving very soon to water. Situation in the water sector, basically about water resources management or drinking water and sanitation, facing some challenges, but they are moving. A bit slowly, but they are moving. Regional center definition here, meaning that let's start with, and this basically fits, by the way, is what we call it Moody operandi, which is a plural for modus operandi, that if you go for BIMBAN, you find that the best way to build the institutional capacity at the people who are taking the project up is basically local communities. And the capacity of the off-taker, which basically the transmission company. That's really very interesting model that it convened 22 developers, 7 development banks, including EBRD, AFD, EIB, and KfW, and the others, and FMO of Netherlands. And what they have come up with is that basically they convened what we call it an association of developers to build a capacity for the transmission company or for the local communities. That's basically what fits very well. It's private sector led, it's more efficient, had created a lot of jobs and have built the capacity and still building and expanding the capacity. The model is now ruling in for the 1,200 megawatt private sector led in wind power plant in Gulf Zayt and Gulf of Suez. What does it mean? That this model, if it would be replicated, but this time it would be with more crowding in local banks and more financial partnerships through climate action, that will feed in building the institutional capacity for the communities that they will basically around improving the climate change impact on mitigation and on adaptation. Let me say something I want to comment about Dr. Shireen. Sometimes you need to combine mitigation and adaptation together. If you're talking here about water desalination, the model that's building now on this is to use desalination using solar power. It's really coming in a very bankable way. Chinese are coming with very attractive experience into this. And I think we need to bring to the attention of the audience that the Chinese, as a giant for this part, they are coming what they call it, we connect the world through Development Belt and Silk Road Fund. And they are coming to start with this year that Egyptian or government of Egypt is now taking the lead for the African Union. And in 2 weeks' time, 53 ministers from Africa will come to that. And their idea is that they will only connect for transmitting renewable energy. And they do that through what we call it bottom-up approach, through community integration for building their capacity. And they are using for that about 7 banks. We are taking part as a recruit for this. What I want to tell you is that the best approach is to go bottom-up, crowding in local and international financial institutions through mega-scale projects as regional convening around mega-scale, like the case of Bimban, and to replicate it. This fitting very well the socio-economic context of the Egyptian society, which typically the same of the tribal nature if you go to Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco, where Amazigh is in, or Tunisia. And I think this is the best way because it has been proven positive results. The most important number that I would like to say, if you go to Bimban, how many jobs have been created and have helped to build the institutional capacity for the project and also for the government? It's actually more than 2,000. That's really a very good number. And the cost of a job is taken down. So it started about $20,000 per job. It's now scaling down up to 15,000. So it's really moving in this way. And I think this is the novelty and innovative approach that's taking place around what we call it site-specific for socio-economic dimension of Egypt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. My next 2 questions are actually addressed to all of you, so please feel free to pick up the mic and answer. So do you think that there would be a way to define how well the countries are advancing in achieving their development of targets against climate change?
Maybe I'd like in the beginning to reflect on what Dr. Ahmed mentioned. Actually, we are looking for the capacity building as one of our plan pillars from a different angle. Actually, we are looking for integration between bottom up and top down. And the Egyptian government is taking further steps in order to improve and enhance the work among the governmental staff. So we have the Minister of Planning nowadays. They have the administrative reform role. And through that, we are cooperating with the UNITAR, the United Nations Institute for Research and Training, in order to assess the skills of the employee of the Ministry of Planning as well as the Ministry of Finance, in order to guarantee that when we start implementing the National Adaptation Plan, we will be able to mainstream climate change among the government plans, the governorate plans, as well as allocate the required budgeting in order to be able in the future to guarantee that the climate change plan is implementable. We are able to find more investments. We have capable staff to take the issue of climate change forward and cooperate with civil society and private sector, as well as the scientists in order to bridge the gap that we are facing during the implementation. And I believe that this has also answered your question concerning the how we guarantee that all these plans will take place in the future, and we are able to guarantee that it will be measurable, and we have indicators that give us the signals we are taking the right directions to reduce our emissions, to adapt with climate change impacts, in order to have happy communities. Because this is our sustainable development strategy, to have happy communities, happy citizens are able to work in a better environment, live in a better conditions, and reduce their carbon footprint, as well as increase their adaptive capacity in order to face any kind of impacts in the future. Thank you.
Please, Mr. Doctor. Right.
I just want to add to what my dear colleague here said. The government and the society, they has to work hand in hand, actually. It will not going to be improved until both of them, they are going to complement each other. For example, I know about some of the projects that the government did put funding to small community in rural areas about, for example, generating biodiesel from dates and olives. I heard before generating biodiesel from jitrova and jojoba and things like that, but from dates and olives, I've never heard about it before. So actually, this is something very important to give them fund, and they did their own project in rural areas, and they live on that. Now, biodiesel, of course, it is going to be a clean energy. This is something. Another thing, you can see in the television, for example, campaigns that the government is doing in order for the people to reduce the number of the population. They have to hear, yes, they have to reduce the number of the population. This is another thing. For example, the preserving of water. We don't have to leave the tap water running all the time. And this is actually campaigns also that the government are doing. People, they have to engage in that, and they have actually to do that. Another thing, the new cities that the government are constructing, for example, I see that no one is going there. Why? If they are providing, for example, infrastructure and transportation, I know this is very important to provide infrastructure, to provide transportation, to provide anything that will make the life of the human easy. So people, they have not to be habituated to the place they are living in. Why not go to other cities? Why not go to other cities in the Sahara? Why? Because actually this will reduce the CO2 emission. Okay, it will widespread it. If they are ready for the people to go, then they have to go. For example, the 6th of October. For example, the New Cairo. People, they went there and it is very successful. Of course, new cities, I know that it is going to be bit by bit in order to go there. 6th of October first was something like a Sahara, but some people went and then other people went. So we do have 6th of October city now, the new Cairo city, the same. So when there is a construction of new cities, and I said before that we have to have the infrastructure, we have to have the transportation means, of course, and all of things like that. If they are there, then people, they have actually to think even about moving there. But we are habituated to the place we are living in, which is normal for the people to do. But if you do have schools, if you do have hospitals, if you do have the public facilities in another actually part of Egypt, why not go there in order to widespread? Okay, if you are going to widespread, you don't have narrow places where the CO2 emissions are going to be very bad to the health of the people. And actually you can see or you can measure From my point of view, what will happen when the CO2 emissions are going to be lessened or decreased? From the health of the people themselves. You are having always statistics about the health of the people and the illness that something like this will cause. Maybe you are going to find that it is improved.
It's too expensive. People
Of course.
You have to make it very reasonable. At a very
Sure,
reasonable
I
price
agree
to
with you.
encourage the people to go.
Sure, I agree with
What
you.
should they- what should they do?
If it is with reasonable prices, then they should go. But what I feel that not only in Egypt and all over the world, that people, they are having habitual, let's say, they are habituated, as we say, to a certain place. So I cannot go to another place. Me, myself, for example, I live here in Doki, but I work in 6th of October. And I do have a house in 6th of October. I don't want to switch myself that I'm saying this. I am bad, okay? So yes, why? Because I'm habituated to my place. This is really bad. So we have to be, to knock the shell, as we say. If we have the good, actually, as I said, infrastructure and the money and all of that you said, you are totally right. And attraction, yes. I said this at the beginning, if we do have the attraction, of course you are totally right.
Okay.
No problem. I'm patient enough to listen to everyone.
Cannot contribute to that discussion. That is a little beyond my horizon. But I think, just quickly coming back to the original question where we started, sort of how can we actually see if states are fulfilling their commitments? I would just like to add the international perspective, that now with the Katowice rulebook we have that transparency system in place. So the states have their nationally determined contribution. We know what they want to do. They will report every 2 years, and then there will be expert review teams looking into that if the reporting is done according to the guidelines that we developed in Katowice. And then there will also be an exchange among states, a facilitative consideration of progress. And so there is this monitoring system in place, what individual states are doing and how they're contributing. The question is it enough? And the key question for the Paris Agreement was basically how often do we look at this? And it decided in Paris already that every 5 years there will be this global stocktake. So taking all the nationally determined contributions together and seeing how we might end up with, if everybody follows through with their commitments, how much are we going to decrease the global warming? And the current NDCs that we have from 2015 would lead us towards a 3.3 degree increase of global temperatures. And we want to aim for 2 or even below 1.5 degrees. So currently we are far off. And there's no sugarcoating in this. The problem is now the next global stocktake, the first one will actually take place only in 2023. Right? So having the next summing up all the nationally determined contributions will only take place 4 years from now. So this is, I think, where it's important to get that national perspective on board. The international framework serves a purpose. It serves a purpose for the next decades, and to increase the ambition over time and time again. Every 5 years, every plan needs to increase the ambition, and every global stocktake will then see if that works and then inform the next round of NDCs. This is the idea of the agreement. But that does not exclude processes that are that important on the national level. So that's really interesting for me also to learn about this discussion here. These transition processes need to be complemented. The Paris Agreement is one and a key aspect in fighting global change, but it's by far not the only one. It's not the only forum where this needs to be discussed. It's not the only forum where it needs to be on the agenda. And I think the national policies and the exchange with the civil society and the population, this is really where it needs to bring in some key activities before we actually have the next round of NDCs. So the national activity can then be monitored and registered on the international level, but it needs to come from bottom up.
I have to say I enjoyed very much all of your contributions. So allow me to answer this along the same title for the workshop today. It's basically about how to prepare for COP25 in Santiago in Chile. I think one of the issues that basically we were invited to be part of the organizing committee for this together with World Energy Council, and we convened for that in Abu Dhabi in September. But it's about one of the main themes will be there is to localize such specific development condition. What does it mean? Let's go and compare between two countries. Let's look at Germany after Second World War. What happened? The Germans have built their economy in few years, because it's basically, it is in their socioculture habits that they know how to build. Germans, by definition, they know how to build and how to innovate to build their living conditions. I know, I'm coming, just let me complete. Everyone is hard worker, by the way. It's different about the topic that I'm aiming to. If we look for the Egyptians, what is the most important topic for the life of the Egyptians? Is to grow up their kids, educate them very well, find a good job for them. That's typically what everyone in the room of the Egyptian wanted to see. I wanted to have a good job. So, if we really wanted to localize the set specific developmental condition or framework, it actually derived for this framework, is that basically is to create jobs for the Egyptian along what they wanted to develop to combat climate change. This is basically the equation. In very simple words, what does it mean? It's exactly, if you wanted to keep your society, you have to feel ownership. Ownership will give you the sustainability, right? Okay, sustainability for the Egyptian will come that when they will see their kids finding an attractive job. To find an attractive job, basically what needs to happen and going to be announced as part of Katowice package or white book that was announced, but with a detailed action plan, is to create several job bands, several jobs to be created along regional integration following the example of each country. Let's go for two specific examples to talk about. I already talked about Bimban and what's happening there, but go for other mega scale projects, basically about what's happening about basically the CSP for mega scale projects in Morocco. I don't know if the audience is aware what's happening in Morocco, but they have one, if it's not the biggest ever, concentrated solar power mega farm there in Morocco. And it's basically developed by a Saudi big developer called the Aqua Power. And it's basically Noor 1, Noor 2, Noor 3, and Noor 4. And they created basically more than 10,000 jobs. Out of these 10,000 jobs, basically 9,000 is coming for the local Moroccan people. This has improved dramatically the societies there. So if basically a country like Egypt wanted to create that, they have to work hand in hand with two-line ministries actors, which are the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Education. And if I'm there with the Cairo Climate Talks here, I would really urge the organizer to start involving Ministry of Education and Ministry of Finance. Why these two? Ministry of Education have to work on basically provide the needed supply of skills for all types of renewable energy at adaptation and mitigation. And Ministry of Finance to start add more on this part in terms of financing to change what we call it the pedagogical structure, which meaning that's the content of the curriculum, and to equip the new generation of such a kind of jobs. By that, Egyptian will really run to catch these jobs, because there will be a new era. And basically what's really happening, if you go for Egypt or for Morocco, and the same case for Jordan, you will find that developers are running for this. They are really coming and to say, we are standing ready to provide all needed training, because there is a gap between supply of skills and the demand. This is the case of Egypt. If you go to Germany, by definition, they all went and they built their solar power, their solar cells above their houses, and they completed their targets ahead of 2020, because this is their culture. I need to work on my culture as well, as Egyptian, as Arabs, which different. As we said before, that the business model of the Arab countries is not European model. European model going from solar rooftop down scale, that's basically like it's not upscale with mega scale projects. Look, and as Mr. Arnie mentioned, that look, they are now looking for shutting down the coal. Since the beginning, the Germans, since long time, they are moving with renewable energy. They are pioneer together with Israel and Spain. But the idea is that despite coal power plant are there for the base load, for the large economic intensive industry, energy intensive industry, they are still on their homes, they cover their targets. This is not the case, and it won't be the case because the overall economic model does not fit. And I would like to quote here President Sisi when he said, we have our own socioeconomic, we have our cultural dimension that's site specific for us as Egyptians, if we're talking about Egypt, which is different than Europe. So we need to build about what attract for me. As Egyptian, I can tell you that it's the only thing that will attract Egyptians to change their mindset if there will be good jobs enough to attract their kids to learn and to educate. I think this is the only thing that needs to be really fit in. And if it will fit in, you will find Egyptian, they run, because they are 100 million and they have enough. And the average generation of the young Egyptian is about 22, which is Egyptian are very young now. That's basically what I think what could be. And the examples are there, and this was going to be replicated in Santiago in Chile COP25 in December. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bud.
May I add something back to your question? Just 2 minutes. Because you asked how would we know if the global warming went down again, actually. There are some factors and some measurements that have been taken and indicate why it did, not why, how it did go up, how much, for example. So now we have the minimum temperature. It rose twice as the maximum temperature. For example, at night, you are having, if it is 1, then at day it is 0.5, the rising, okay? This is bad. Why? Because at night, actually, you have more humidity, and this more humidity is going to evaporate at the morning. So you are having now more evaporation. So it is bad. It is recorded, and it is recorded by satellites that the vapor pressure is more now because of the global warming over the years. It is increasing, actually. And one thing is that the storms also, they are recorded to be increasing in the world. And as my dear colleague here said, yes, now the global warming is about 3-something degrees centigrade rise. It was actually mathematically modeled that at 4 degrees centigrade, 10% precipitation will happen. So those things are quantifiable and you can measure them. So when we are going to go down, then you are going to have the effect lessened. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shireen. Before I get to my last question, which is all addressed to the panel, so I'd like to remind our audience that we'll be collecting the questions right now for the opening of the Q&A sessions after my question. So how do you think the civil society can be involved to catalyze action against climate change from the different perspectives? From did you have
CCD, everyone is stepping back, I step in. She's asking about the role of the civil society.
We have to change, you know. Stop.
Ma, ask before you take over the topic, what is it? Where is the civil society? I really wanted to know. I've been basically a motor engineer and for almost 20 years, and the last 15 years of after these 20, I'm a bit old man. It's basically about energy. I really ask and urge everyone, if they count down for me 5 civil society dealing with energy or green energy, let me know. Really, let me know. It's not there. So the only way to do is exactly to see again, since we're talking, I have a couple of models coming from Europe, one of them coming from Germany. You need to create the supply to articulate the demand. If you wanted to look for the what needed to be happen, because we have a big issue here. Civil society is not existing for most of the developing countries around energy, because it's basically the more needed before energy is human rights. So let's not talk about human rights, talk about energy. That's much easier topic. So the only issue here that we're talking about is civil society for energy. It's not there. The only one is to create them, like the case, again, I'm sorry to repeat it, but this is the only example in the country, like the case of Bimban. There was an association between the developers and the local community. That's not what's need to be replicated. And actually, for the Middle East countries or the Southern Mediterranean countries, that really fit very well. Let me give you a very exciting story that I want to tell you how does it work. If you go for a country like Jordan, when I was before joining RICRI, I was the principal environmental advisor for the Middle East based in London. And one day, the banking team came to me and they told me we have a big problem in Jordan. There is one of the biggest power plant in Jordan called IPPP4, Independent Power Production Station number 4, and it's very big, and it's basically fueled by heavy fuel oil, or what we call it HFO. And the power plant, if it's located like that, it's basically located in a land that between two tribes. And it has to be 50-50 between the two tribes, because each tribe saying to the other, look, why you are taking more from my land? Am I the weak tribe here? And we have started to look, how can we find a local moderator to solve this problem? And it's what went there. So the idea is that basically, I went for one of my, basically what we call it, the Royal Board of Tribes, or in Arabic, if you're talking about Arabic, Al-Majlis Al-Malaki Al-Ashairi. His Majesty the King, in order to ensure all Jordanian will follow him, each tribe have to have intellect one, and this one will be in the board of the king. That's why Jordan have 65 government in 50 years. The king has to change the government every 9 months to ensure that all tribes give him the loyalty. The loyalty, otherwise they will separate, because if you know the history, there was no any country called Jordan less than 50 years ago. It was called East Jordan River State, simply because the key part was coming from Syria and Lebanon. Anyway, it's history. So we stay on our story. So what has happened, that the developer has to have, for each job, 2 people, one from each tribe, to be basically recruited. Otherwise, the tribe will shut down the power plant. And the developer said, look, I'm really suffering. For creating a job, I have to double pay for this, and I don't know what to do. And the idea is that basically they started to agree to create a very specific NGO, a civil society organization, or what we call it country-based association, CPA, and basically this country-based association is to take care for facilitating any job. And by that, the demand they created the civil society. I think if we really wanted to help our country is to work with the private sector developers. It's not for the government. Civil society has to be independent. And who create the need for them is basically the developers, who's coming mainly from private sector, and this to be replicated. And as my colleague from Ministry of Environment, basically they only need to build the policy and the regulation for this and to overlook at it. But basically the implementation would be left for these culturally sensitive issues between the civil society, and that basically fits very well. And if you wanted to enjoy more stories, I can tell you about Croatia and Serbia that I used to live with, and I have been inherited with that in Europe, which is more difficult than Arab countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arni.
I can see already 400 questions from the audience coming up, so I'll try to be very brief, but I just wanted to add to the excellent examples from the German perspective. So if you sort of categorize the participation of civil society, in Germany, I can sort of just highlight 2 examples where the government was reaching out and providing that sort of input way forward for civil society. The one is the Climate Action Plan 2050 that was developed between 2015 and 2016. So within 6 to 9 months, there was several meetings taking place, several working groups, including different ranges of stakeholders, to make sure that all sectors of the German economy that are greenhouse gas relevant are included, have their say, and then develop an action plan for some first measures with regards to timeline 2030. So this was an environmental ministry-driven process, but other ministries were involved as well. Not everything went perfect. Of course, some civil society organizations and everybody who was involved, they have a vast amount of ideas, and you need to streamline them to some extent. And when then all ministries look at that, and also the finance ministry looks at that, then it really trims things down. So there are lessons learned also from these processes, but you have to say that was a process. There was a National Climate Action Plan 2050, and Germany was the first country in the COP22 in Marrakesh to present that to the public. So we'll see if it works with the planning, but the process, that was there. So a government-initiated process. The second example I want to bring once more is this commission that recommended the coal phase out. You have unions there, you have employers associations in there, you have utilities from the energy sector in there, you had some environmental NGOs in there, but altogether the commission were just 25 people. So in not having like this overarching approach including all sectors, you try to have very specific representatives of the sectors to have all voices heard, but a very small commission. So of course the commission's recommendations still need to be implemented, so we'll see how much their word is actually being weighed by the different ministries, but also that's a way forward, government initiated in a much smaller scale, but still with far-reaching consequences. So the 2038 goal for the coal phase out now is sort of public knowledge. This is out there, so there is some pressure. Even though there's no legislation yet, it's very unlikely that any German ministry will fall behind that agreement or anyone else from the actors involved. And just as last example to conclude, if you do not open these channels for participation, we will have Fridays for Future and other movements which have the right to demonstrate, and they will make use of it, and they will connect themselves and put public pressure on the government themselves. So it's really one of the two options. You open the channels and learn from learning by doing and from other good examples across the world, or there will be eventually, if there's young students, if it's scientists supporting them, there will be different groups which actually combine their forces and put some political pressure on the system. So these are like just two key options I think that we've seen in Germany so far, and I'm really curious how these will be brought together, because we have seen the participation processes which end in compromises, and we have now sort of people demonstrating on the streets for more ambitious targets. How does that work together? So that's going to be a complicated issue, but it's nothing to shy away from. It's just something to explore and to be open to discuss.
The civil society, actually, for me, it consists of two parties, me and you and everybody. And actually, there's a large entities like, for example, hotels, like companies, like banks, like things like trading, like things like that. Me and you and things like that, I mentioned it before, and I had a discussion with this beautiful lady here. But as for example, for the banks, the hotels, and the commercial things, they may actually use PV cells for heating, for the appliances. They may use water-saving fixations for the sinks and for the, sorry to say, toilets, flushing toilets and things like that, in order to save on energy, in order to save the emissions of the CO2 and things, in order to actually save us from that global warming effect. They can do that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shini.
And from the perspective of the Egyptian government, we are trying to have an integrated approach. So we are dealing with the representative of the civil society. So we have a member of the Civil Society Union taking the membership of the National Council of Climate Change, as well as we are supporting some other youth initiatives such as AYCM or 350.org, and we supported one of the youth, Abdullah, to take part in the negotiation. So he was joining our team as an overflow member of the Egyptian delegation. Also, we are working with the CSOs and communities through our cooperation, for example, with GIZ. One good example could be given here is the Participatory Development Program, which is working in the Greater Cairo region. And through the program, we managed to implement some climate change adaptation measures, such as rooftop farming or shading in the markets of the areas. And the community was supporting this adaptation measures. And even for the rooftop farming, they were paying around 10% of the total cost of the project, which show that they have the sense of ownership, and they believe that this kind of adaptation measures is bringing to them back some benefits. And also we have wide good experience in ecosystem-based adaptation and community-based adaptation in our protected areas all over Egypt. As may you know, if you visited any protected area like in Ras Mohammed, in Marsa Alam, in any of our protected areas, you will find that we bring the Bedouin and the indigenous communities who live in these areas to the board. They are taking part in the management of the protected area. We hired some of them actually, and they get their salaries from working with the Egyptian Ministry of for Environmental Affairs, as well as we implemented some measures in order to enhance and improve the community through providing training courses for handicrafts, for example, in order to support the community and the families to be able to get their livings through this kind of projects, small and intermediate projects. And through all these aspects, and in cooperation with other ministries, not just the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Youth, for example, Ministry of Social Solidarity, we are trying to have this integrated approach, and I believe that within the Egypt's 2030 Sustainable Development Strategy, the efforts of the Egyptian government will be enhancing to guarantee that the civil society will take part in the whole process from planning to the implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sabir. And now the floor is open for the questions, and I have some very interesting questions over here. But please excuse me if we won't be able to address all of them. We can continue addressing them later on over dinner. So I'll try to mention a few here. So you mentioned that $300 trillion are expected to be paid on climate. So how much of them are expected to be spent on research? It's not mentioned who your question is addressed to, but I believe it's to Dr. Badr, right?
Clearly has zero money on research. It's about investment. It's about saving lives because of the threatening climate impact. So the only thing that could happen is basically through R&D, mainly for developers of technology. And one of the technologies is about socioeconomic impact. And this is a topic that basically, for who asked for this, he has to go through Horizon 2020 program that is basically coming funded by the European Commission. And the key part for that is basically for minimizing the migration from south to north because of that, of the climate change impact. My advice, again, go through internet, through Horizon 2020 EU funded program, and you find all related areas for R&D. But for these 300 trillion, it's pure capital investment projects. And again, 90% coming, or actually 93% coming from private sector investment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Badr. The next question is, what's the effect of US withdrawing from the Paris Agreement? If it's huge, would this affect the commitment of 6 other countries toward climate change negotiations? It's open for anyone, I believe, or unless the person who asked this question, would you like to say who you want to address?
As it would affect the other countries' commitment, the series of commitment that US like.
Okay, yes, I was about to answer about this. Well, first of all, that the only answer is in the mind of one person in the world, which is Mr. Trump himself. Nobody knows, actually. But the last of which I heard from some American senators was actually in Berlin Transition Dialogue, that basically, that was last year. Look, when basically US will step down by 2020 from Green Climate Fund, Saudi Arabia will step in. That's basically what I'm sure from. And Saudi Arabia, with the leadership of His Excellency Prince Mohammed bin Salman, he's already announced that. That was already done. What is the effect on that? Nobody knows. But basically, what's sure is that he's increasing the pollution. By what evidence? I don't know how many of us is aware of what we call it. Shale oil or shale gas basically, just to let you know what is shale oil or shale gas, is that in some of the countries there are some kind of, the gas or the oil is embedded in the rocks. So to take down the oil or gas, and actually for you, surprising that we have 2 Arab countries have the biggest, or the among top 5, basically Jordan for the shale gas and Morocco for the shale oil. And for Jordan, it's not only non-economically viable, it's live or this. For them, Jordania needs water more than gas. So they don't have water. In order to take out the gas, you have basically to what to call it freaking. And you need water for this, and they don't have water. So simply what President Trump said, and he's doing, because we all know that US has one of the largest reserve in the oil in the world. We all know that. Basically what he's doing, he's fracking, he's taking out oil, he's selling, he doesn't care what's more important for him, and the Americans likes him. And with his economic indicators, he will be re-elected, that he's taking out more and more oil. That's basically what Mr. Trump is saying. Anyone object, go and discuss that with Mr. Trump himself. That's all what I can tell you. This is the impact. But for replacing for Green Climate Fund and for the commitment is Saudi Arabia. And until now, there is no indicators in the ground to increase more than 10.8 until GCF basically solves the problem of how the countries led by Germany and UK, they will ensure the payback on their money. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bed. Mr. Oni, you have a comment regarding this question as well, right?
Just quickly from a legal point of view. So as mentioned before, so the US can only basically publicly declare that it's leaving. Can declare whatever it wants, but with a legal force, it can only do that 3 years after the agreement entered into force. So this would be in early November 2019, and then the leaving the agreement would just enter into force 1 year later. So this would be actually, I think, a week before the next presidential elections. So it is, again, in the hands of civil society, of the American people, to decide whether or not they want to continue with that kind of president and his kind of climate and energy policy, or if they pick somebody else who, and I think...
Or he will shut down the government, as he did with Mexico.
that is not for me to comment on. Having said that, so until now, the US colleagues in the negotiations have been participating in the negotiations. They were also in Katowice. They were very proactive in, of course, in specific US interests, but that's like every country brings their interests to the table. But they are and still are engaged in the negotiations and will continue to do so until the US actually pull out of the agreement. So, and then it would be sort of if somebody else would be elected, maybe 2-month transitional period, and they could easily enter the agreement again. So just to say, if there's political change, the legal change can follow suit. That's not the problem from the agreement side. Having said that, the financial gap, that is really the threatening part, and there will be potentially other countries stepping up and stepping in. I think China really has indicated it has an interest to fill the political role. We'll see if they will follow up with financial commitments as well. Right. So there might be other countries stepping in to fill that gap. And just to mention, yes, there are still very many American people who like Mr. Trump, but the approval ratings are, I think, somewhere in the 30% area, so it's not all of them. And the American civil society and very many cities, universities, and local communities have made clear with the We Are Still In initiative, which was very prominent, featured at COP23. They had a big pavilion to show we are civil society, we are cities, we are municipal level, but we are still interested in the goals of the Paris Agreement. So there are thousands of cities, there are regional greenhouse gas initiatives that are doing emission trading for decades now. There are, in California, you have an emission trading system. So on the state level in the US, you do have very many active people who are very climate aware. So while the federal level can pull out all these financial contributions, there will be still civil society and cities and states on the subnational level which will still be contributing. So just to paint a little, hopefully tiny, rosy picture than just expecting. But of course, if Mr. Trump is re-elected, this might continue to harm the purpose. And so far, nobody else pulled out. That's a really important part. When Mr. Trump was elected, there were many people in 2016 at the COP actually mentioning his name and saying, we will double our efforts, we will make up for that gap. And the one other country that has been very skeptical about its participation was Brazil and the new president. But last time I checked, I think in early January, he reaffirmed when he was elected, and his environmental minister confirmed that for now they have no active plans to leave the agreement. That might change at some point, but for now, the US is the only country that might pull out in 2020. For now, everybody else has signed up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arni. The next question is to Mr. Sabir. How will the Egyptian efforts for development balance between both the intense production going along with growth and the adverse effects of the production?
Actually, we have different methodologies in order to deal with the development. So, for example, there is to work towards improving the carbon intensity of the country, so we can reduce our greenhouse emissions in comparison to the contribution of the GDP percentage. And this is actually one of our methodologies to achieve the development without increasing our greenhouse gases emissions. And to do so, we are having in place different policies. As we mentioned before, we have subsidies reform for the energy sector, feed-in tariffs, and the other stuff, which energy efficiency, public transportation. So all these different aspects will lead to achieving deviation from the business as usual of our projected emissions in the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sabir. And the last question would be, why is Egypt not multiplying the solar power plant of Kuraimat and solve the financial payback problems on this way today?
I was part of the financier, so allow me. The solar power project in Kuraimat is a very unique technical model. It's the project called Integrated Combined Cycle Solar Thermal Project. So it's basically about 150 megawatt. Let's talk a little bit engineering. It's one combined cycle, meaning that there is a supply of gas to heat up water and the return exhaust steam basically to work on generating energy. That's basically the combined cycle, which 125 megawatt turbine, gas thermal turbine. The 25, the remaining, or almost 20, is basically coming from solar. And the four financier was World Bank, EU, and I think, I cannot remember the other two, but I was at that time working for Japan Bank, and basically we were taking care of the 125 megawatt. It's basically a contractual issue that basically there is in engineering what we call it function tight project, meaning if you're going toward the power plant, you cannot admit the project is successful is until the project generate energy or electricity. And there was a very diluted responsibility about is that the developer of the gas turbine 125 megawatt or the 25 megawatt solar project, because the technical connection between two was very complicated and the responsibility have been lost between two. That's why this model didn't provide any kind of success. Was basically 2 or 3 experiences in the world, one of them in Egypt, and has not proven success. So the idea is that the business model that would work is basically pure solar power project based on direct injection from the heat and the panel to the grid, or through storage, some kind of battery storage for PV, or basically what Egypt is planning to do now in Komombo for through salt and malt CSP, concerted solar power. But this model has not proven what we call it operability or the endurance for the project to provide sustainable and pragmatic solution. So it's basically a technical issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Badr. And now as we come to the end of our discussion today, I would like to thank all of our esteemed panelists for providing us tonight with valuable input, each in your field of specialty. And of course, I'd like to thank all of you for being with us today. Overall, I think we've got some great insights out of today's discussion, and I believe it would be hard to put it to a conclusion, because it's the very start of a long dialogue. And all of you in this room are here today because you hold very important information in your heads for this dialogue to continue going forward. I believe we can reach some conclusions, but maybe we'll reach them out of this room. And we would be very grateful for your continued support in this difficult process and trying to identify what those next steps are. I think one thing I'll summarize is we heard that people see the potential for what this could do, and of course the potential could be realized or not. And that is really down to the process from here on and how involved you all in this room get. So thank you all for a day full of learning and being so dedicated and involved. And now, please, I invite you to go for a dinner outside in the garden. Thank you very much again.